Hi there, I'm Jeff Klaben with Cinequest and the Cinejoy Film Festival, and we're here this evening for a very special event. It's our comedy roundtable, and we're inspired by the career of Billy Wilder. So let me introduce our distinguished guests here. From the film Hundreds of Beavers, we've got Doug Manchesky.
Yep.
Welcome. From East Bay, Daniel Yoon. Egghead and Twinkle, Sarah Karambi Holland. And our lead actress, Sabrina Giaffa. Daddy with Neil Kelly and Jono Sherman. And The Golden Age with Jenna Saru.
Thank you.
Welcome. We feel funny already? This is we've got to loosen up the crowd quickly here.
Yeah. TGIF, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I'm lucky my producer got me to loosen up beforehand, but I think that we can start by just talking about anything where experts are on Billy Wilder or not experts, but whatever film we've seen that was inspiring. I know that Daniel Yoon did a master's thesis on Billy Wilder and his post-contemporary views. And, but seriously, let's talk about Wilder. Have you seen his films? What do you like?
Yeah,
I love Billy Wilder when he focuses mostly on the relationships and he wants you to get it right away. That's what I appreciate the most. And so that's what I really like about him. That I think he had a quote. You're talking very famous quotes. I think one of his famous quotes was, "The setup, the situation should be obvious," and I think that might run afoul of some directors that are directing today. But there's something to be said for that. His films were very successful, and what I like about also his films, like his most successful films were very witty and had great pace, but they were also, from an actor's point of view, they were really grounded in the relationships and the humanity of the characters, and as if the really funny lines were like being improvised. And that's what I really appreciate from his films. It wasn't just a bunch of smart lines. It was really grounded in reality and the setup and the relationships, which is huge.
It feels natural, like something you hear people actually saying.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you, Doug. And I forgot to mention, we've got the Beaver himself, Ryland Chews, with us as well. Welcome, Ryland. Uh-oh. Well, what happened to Ryland? You lost this one?
He was eaten up by the beavers.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll tie it up at the moment. Thank you. Thank you, Beaver. Jono, is there any Wilder film that caught your attention, or if the audience could only see one thing he's done, what would you suggest?
I think the one that I connect to most is The Apartment. And I think, I mean, obviously it's a brilliant film, but I think what makes it so unique, especially for the time that it was made in, is that it so seamlessly pairs together the comedy and the tragedy that I think we all sort of experience in our day-to-day life. And I actually watched it last week, sort of in preparation for this, or rewatched it. And I was just so struck by how modern it was, how modern the characters were, and how Wilder and the entire cast, they just didn't they didn't shy away from some of the tough realities of modern life. And I think the sort of tragedy of that story makes the comedy and makes the hopefulness at the end stand out all the more.
And that, I think that relates to your project, Daddy, and definitely some real reality there.
a little bit. It was interesting watching it again, watching The Apartment, because it's it's shot anamorphically. I mean, it's very widescreen, which was very rare at the time to do that, especially for a black and white film. And we shot our film anamorphically, and it made me realize, we didn't have that in mind. The apartment was never a reference for us visually or otherwise. But I think what that film achieves with it being so widescreen is you really get a sense of the depth, and you get a sense of the characters in his apartment, in the offices, just on the streets of New York. It's a very lonely movie. And you sort of see how the space is accentuated in that wide screen, and you see how small they are. And you see just in his very tiny apartment, kind of how vast it feels and how empty it almost feels. And that just that's just such after doing something like Some Like It Hot, which is the greatest comedy maybe ever, just him going further and innovating beyond just sort of the writing, but actually in the filmmaking. It's just really astonishing and inspiring.
I guess he's switching between scale.
Yeah.
Right. So like we're one little tiny cube in this apartment, if you will. But I noticed with Daddy and also with Egghead and Twinkie that there was a lot of interesting dialogue. And so we got a big picture, but then we got intimate pretty quickly. Are you able to be funny at an anamorphic scale, or do you have to be two folks talking to each other?
Yeah, I think you can be funny no matter what it is, as long as the characters and the situation and the dialogue feel grounded in what's happening, which he was just a genius at. I mean, he was so great at, here's the setup, here's the world, here are the people. You buy in immediately, and then you can go wherever you want because you're in good hands with him in every film, no matter if it's a noir like Double Indemnity or Irma la Douce or whatever it is. He's just very good at keeping you kind of in the best of hands.
Thank you, Neil. You trust throughout. Jenna, you bring an interesting perspective. I know the Golden Age was featured here, and you're also involved in creating film festivals, Paris International. And
Yes.
What does a film festival look for in comedy?
Most certainly, the dream is to find a form of universality. I mean, comedies have been historically an incredible way to achieve change. And I love, Jeff, that you just showed a poster from Some Like It Hot with the three protagonists. And it's like a triangle of characters, because as it was mentioned on the panel earlier, it's usually a lot of work and collaboration between the director and the cast. It is something you see actually in the Golden Age, because there is a triangle of nationalities, right? This American who meets a French actress and a British band in France, and together they just somehow go on a very special voyage. I think at film festivals, just like for any audience member, you always want to be away from time, and it's beautiful to see how comedies can make you travel geographically, but also in time. Because I mean, Some Like It Hot, it hasn't aged much, has it?
It still makes me laugh. So Sabrina and Sarah, Egghead and Twinkie maybe had something more reminiscent of Wilder's approach in the dialogue, and there was sort of these clever exchanges that, and you also could have jazzed it up with the animation and the color, which I'd love to know how you achieved, because that just looked beautiful. But was Wilder an inspiration or in the back of your mind as you were working on your film?
I think he very well might have been in the back of my mind, because I was going through film school at the time that I was writing Egghead and Twinkie, and Wilder is definitely a staple, in film school to watch his works. And I would agree. I think, the thing that I think of when I think of Billy Wilder is his sharp dialogue, and that was really something that I was trying to channel with this script. Also, I think the tightness of his plots and the pacing, that was something with Egghead and Twinkie. I think with comedy, pacing is so important, with whether or not a joke will land. So for us, it was like we cut everything that either wasn't funny or wasn't advancing the plot in any way. So our initial assembly cut was 3 hours long, and the final runtime is 87 minutes. So quite a lot was left on the cutting room floor to get to the final product.
That's discipline.
Oh yeah, it took a long time.
Oh, here's an off the cuff question. Maybe you can help me relate to my kids better. I've got teenagers who convince me daily I don't know what a meme is. And they have a way of telling jokes that seems hyper abbreviated to me now. Is the sensibility and the timing of comedy changing? I mean, social media and these clips, and do you have as much time to set up I mean, Wilder, I think, was ahead of his time with, delivering a punchline quickly, but is this formula for comedy changing?
Personally, I think the setup and a joke has always kind of been the same. It's, the material that we're telling jokes about, I would say, is the thing that changes, as society moves forward. But I don't know, I think that there are some things about, telling jokes that are just timeless. And I think that that's why you can watch films from the 40s and 50s and still find things that you can incorporate into your work now. But I don't know, Sabrina, you're like more social media savvy than me, I think. Do you have anything you want to throw in?
Filmmakers, I don't know if you can hear me now. Better now.
Perfectly,
Okay,
beautiful.
perfect.
Thank you.
Nice. Okay. I think filmmakers like Billy Wilder, and I think just a bunch of almost pioneers kind of brought in the original sense of comedy and what that is supposed to look like. And then I think throughout the years, it definitely evolved to, honestly, nowadays, I think this generation is very like self-deprecating type of humor and just taking jabs at ourselves and learning how to kind of take that from others as well as like give it back. And we really, I think, not to pat myself on the back, but convey that with Egghead and Twinkie, I think, in a honest and true way. So yeah, I hope people like that and receive it.
Absolutely. Neil, I think the trust you described when you're watching a Wilder film, there's something predictable. You're going to get rewarded for spending the time. Is that because there's a formula that we're all counting on?
I don't know. I mean, I think there could be, although, I think you could break down, act 1, act 2, act 3, payoff, setup, and everything. And it doesn't work if you don't have Jack Lemmon or Marilyn Monroe or Shirley MacLaine. They kind of, I think, bring it to life. And I think one of his geniuses was in casting and sort of partnering up with actors like Lemmon and Tony Curtis. I mean, the moment I always think about in Some Like It Hot is Tony Curtis has come back from the beach when he first dresses up as the sort of yacht guy. He's in the bath. And then once Marilyn Monroe leaves the room, he angrily gets out of the bath. And you see that while he's dressed as a woman from the top, he's wearing his suit from the beach. And just his physicality in that moment is just, you can't write that on the page, that's just an actor there in the moment on the day. So I think for as great of a writer as he is, he also got very lucky because, he got to work with some of the best actors of his time.
Ryland, you seem to depend on physicality as your primary mode of communication. Does that work for you? You made me laugh. I guess you've got the gift. Now, Daniel, I noticed, watching East Bay, which really hit home for folks in Silicon Valley and especially working. I'm sitting in an IT department right now doing this interview. It seems like the flow and the humor was unscripted, but clearly it couldn't have been. But can you just talk a little bit about how you created this intriguing story? I mean, and kept the audience's attention throughout?
Oh, thanks. It's, I guess, along the lines of what Doug said earlier, it's about this. East Bay resembles Billy Wilder's films in that it's really the comedy's in the relationships and the individual characters, but other than that, it's nothing like a Billy Wilder film. But yeah, there's just putting these different characters in the scene and seeing what happens. And you know, each of them has their own, obviously like as in a Billy Wilder film, each of them has his or her own agenda and is often trying to keep that agenda hidden from the other characters of the scene. And seeing that play out is a big part of, for me, the humor.
When you were working through East Bay, did you have a sense of where you would kind of get the humorous response from an audience, or did you have certain punchlines in mind, or?
Not really. Just to me, I'm mostly just trying to crack myself up. I like if it makes, you know, it makes me happy to crack myself up. And you know, the characters or the actors in the scene, they were, you know, the take would end and they would crack up, and it was fun doing that. And to me, it was just trying to tell a story while having as many of those moments that felt natural in the film. But I wanted to say something separate actually about Billy Wilder's as a voice of dissent. I didn't actually grow up watching Billy Wilder. I didn't go to film school. I didn't see his films in any kind of curated environment, and I didn't have them recommended to me by filmmaker friends. And so I didn't really know. Like when I joked earlier off camera about Gene Wilder, that was sort of my immediate reaction. It's like, okay, Gene Wilder, Billy Wilder, Oscar Wilder, you know, and that was where I was at. And so I had to go watch. I'd seen parts of his movies on TV just accidentally, but then I had to go back and watch The Apartment and Some Like It Hot. And to me, they were not funny. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to like them. I felt like I was looking at history, but in terms of actually laughing, to me, I was not. It felt really dated. It felt forced. And the setups, the situations were often very funny, but the actual execution to me, I was just like, oh man, this is the kind of thing that, say, an SNL sketch would make fun of. The sort of very forced humor.
Mechanical, I guess.
Yeah. And the odd mixture of sort of vaudevillian acting as well as much more naturalistic acting. That to me is just, it's a shock looking at it now.
Do you think it was funnier at the time and it's aged poorly, or the mechanics just didn't work for you?
I think it must have been much funnier at the time. I think as viewers, we've become much more sophisticated and discriminating about what we find funny, and everything, all humor that we view has to somehow up or match and do better than previous comedies we've seen. So it's a difficult bar to surpass.
Interesting. Dissenting vote. I love this.
I agree sort of with The Apartment. If for some reason I don't think it holds up today as I still like Some Like It Hot, but I think The Apartment, and I agree with you. We're much more intelligent. You're talking about the social media. I'm like with you. I got to Google it, what they're talking about sometimes, because I have no idea. But we're much more intelligent, and but Wilder was still referencing what was in the zeitgeist at the time too. But you could take him for face value, but he's also doing some subversive satire too of what was happening in society at the same time. Also, I'd like to put a point in why do we like Wilder so much? How can we trust him? The more zany the script, I felt, as long as we'll be with him, as long as it's somewhat plausible, we'll be with him. And for the most part, he is that way. And that's what I like about him. You're like, I don't know about this. But then you think about in your mind, oh, this could happen, I guess. As long as you have that in your mind, this could happen, it works.
The anticipation.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's just a quick question for everybody. I'm curious. Do you think folks laughed harder at a joke when it's delivered in person or on the big screen?
I think
When
it
you're with
depends all on timing. And I think that's sort of when you're making a film, part of the power that you have, specifically when you're editing a film, is to control timing. And a joke can either land or you can completely whiff on it based on how you make the cut. I think in person, comedic timing is something that some people either sort of have or they don't have. But when you're making a film, a line that you never saw as being funny necessarily on the page can become hilarious if you cut it the right way, and if the actor performs it in a way that maybe you didn't foresee. So I think, there's a power to both in person and on screen. But I would say that in person, it has to be more organic, whereas on screen, you can kind of, cheat it sometimes with some clever editing.
I knew that question was going to pay off. Thank you, Jono.
Yeah,
What do
sure.
other folks think? Does it matter if you're in person? Is it, the film gives you more opportunity to give it a punch?
I think it's like very, I completely agree with what he just said. Like it's very like environmentally aware. I think you just have to be like aware of like, okay, time and place, like what is the setup? And especially I think because this was my first comedy that I was a part of, filming this short. It's funny, when I attended the premiere for the first time, I kind of just sat in the back and like, I don't know, the weird, egotistical, narcissistic actor part of myself wanted to see everybody's reaction, and kind of like, what would hit, what wouldn't? And it shocked me to see what jokes kind of hit and translated through screen and which actually were not meant at all to be funny or jokes, and they completely, killed. So it's just funny how things, but I completely agree with what he said. I think it's very much a perfect storm type of thing.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Mhm.
Anyone other passionate about that question?
Yeah, as an actor, I get a little bit nervous when the director is trying to cut the timing of my comedy sometimes, and especially it's something I've done on stage before and they filmed. I get a little bit, really, but of course you don't know what's funny until you're in an audience. Let's face it. You can trust your opinion. I mean, when Mike Nichols that's why he always rehearsed his before he filmed. He rehearsed actually for 2 weeks, because he would always say, like, I don't know I have a hunch what's funny, but I don't know for sure, and I have to be for sure, besides having the actors getting to know the characters and the relationships. So
Is Rylan still funny? That's the question.
Rylan is saying to me he agrees, and he's the funniest guy in the world. Yes.
Perfect. I do have to say, Hundreds of Beavers was a monochromatic masterpiece. Like I started watching it and I underestimated it, and then but I think it has this surreal, I mean, each project had something really special. That one just sort of I underestimated until I kind of saw how it progressed. So
yeah, and I was in it. I underestimated it too until I saw it. I'm on a TCM kick with silent films, and in Hundreds of Beavers, a lot of it's silent, and it's just so wonderful as far as just the power of silence and expression. I mean, talk about timing and being exactly focused on how you deliver something. I thought, and I'm glad people are warming up to it, because it's because at first you're like, but it really is wonderful.
it's a good time. Jono, I'm curious, and Neil, with Daddy, there was a lot of masculine energy in that film. And is that good material for funny? Does that make it easier, harder? Do you need, that gender interplay to find humor?
Yeah, I mean, men are ridiculous people, and when you get a group of them together, I think especially in a situation like ours where they're sort of trapped together and can't leave, there's a lot of comedy to be mined from that, because I think what Jono and I were interested in was a lot of the trappings of masculinity and how maybe in a different kind of society, what would that look like? But I think the movie, you know, and we got to see it with an audience recently, and it really kicks into gear once the female character comes in, because the dynamic shifts. And again, that's just to bring it back to Wilder. That's something, the interplay between the sexes, I think, is something he returned to again and again and again. And in our film, it just felt very natural for when the female character shows up. How did the men change? How did they react to one another? How did they react to her? It was just a great opportunity to kind of like flip the movie on its head a little bit.
Thank you. So Sarah, and Jenna, and Daniel, I'm curious if you can sort of describe the experience of coming up with an idea that's funny, and then how do you actually take that all the way through to something that's on the screen? Like in a nutshell, do you have a clear idea that this is a joke you want to work in, or what's the process?
Yes, I think it's going to relate really well with what the panel just said, actually, also about physicality, because for me, the best comedy moments really are not about making it funny. It comes with the character. So for instance, in the Golden Age, there are moments where some of the characters think they're making a joke or think something is funny, but the American character doesn't understand the humor or doesn't like it because of his own past or culture or personal story. And I think it's something really beautiful, because about the female protagonist, it also changes her. It's like a mirror of reflection. Sometimes the comedy tells you more about the characters than about the joke. And I think somehow it also reflects back to the audience, and this is how change can happen within the audience. So I think it's really beautiful. There is also a moment when it was actually a suggestion from the cast, the British cast, to raise one hand, but then raise the other hand. And I thought it was very fun, a great suggestion, because comedy travels really well or not, right? I mean, there is some universality, but you have to find it as a team, and I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd say personally for me, I like to look for comedy or the humor in kind of unexpected situations. So with our film, really the kernel of an idea that started it all was I came out to my parents, and then a couple months later, I came up with the idea for this film. And I wanted to try to find the humor in the coming out process, which historically for LGBTQ people has not really been something to laugh about. And for me, I thought that was an interesting challenge and could be an empowering thing, you know, to be able to laugh at something that, you know, usually scares us and is scary for the community. So I think that comedy is often underestimated as a medium, not only to make people laugh, but also to have conversations about things that are hard. So I think that's kind of how I approach comedy, is looking for things that maybe people don't usually laugh at, and then seeing if there's a way to find the heart and humor in that situation.
Package something that could be unsettling with a way to put people at ease. And yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And then it makes it easier to talk about these things too, you know, and that's another hope with the movie, is that it'll open up conversations for people to talk about coming out in a way that feels more approachable and fun as well.
Daniel, any thoughts on that question? Or I'm also curious how you managed to get such star power in your film.
Constance, the film was shot before Crazy Rich Asians, and this was actually Constance Wu's first lead role in a feature film, and it took a long time to edit the film for any number of reasons. And so we got lucky there, but she was an obvious standout from the moment she showed up for the audition, as were several other actors, including Kavi Ramachandran Ladner and Melissa Pond and others. But we were lucky with her.
Well done. Thank you. I can't believe we just burned a half an hour, but I'm so grateful to you all for sharing and our celebration of comedy with this roundtable inspired by Billy Wilder. Again, Hundreds of Beavers, East Bay Daddy, Egghead and Twinkie, and The Golden Age. Check them all out. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.